Hi everyone. In this video I will be analyzing a few important scenes and a handful of shots, still frame shots from the film Citizen Kane. And I'm going to be analyzing these using a variety of terms that we've learned so far, but I'm going to be mostly focusing on the elements of composition, some of the terms that we've learned most recently. Okay, I'm going to start with this. This is an early scene from the film. This is, I think, one of the most famous scenes in terms of the composition of Citizen Kane. This, of course, is the scene where young Charlie Kane is essentially sold off to this character here in the top hat. So let's go ahead and get started, and I'll be talking over this scene and pausing it a few times. Okay, so I'm going to begin here with this extreme long shot.
Be careful, Charles.
Looking out through the window, the camera dollies back or pulls back.
Tell him now. Yes. I'll sign those papers now, Mr. Thatcher.
Okay, so as this scene begins, we saw Charlie Kane amidst all of that snow, and he was really the only human subject in that shot. And as the camera pulls back, he continues to get smaller and smaller in the background, kind of receding into the background. Okay, so the size of the characters will change in this film as the camera moves in and out, and sometimes they'll change. Their size will change too as they move towards or away from the lens as well. But you can see here that we start to get this frame within a frame effect on Charlie Kane here. Now watch also what happens with the size of the mother's character in the frame as she moves.
You people seem to forget that I'm the boy's father.
It's going to be done exactly the way I've told Mr. Thatcher.
There ain't nothing wrong with Colorado. I don't see why we can't raise our own son just because we come into some money. If I want, I can go to court. A father has a right to.
Oh, whoops. Let me. Sorry, guys. Let me go back to that real quick.
Done exactly the way I've told Mr. Thatcher.
There ain't nothing wrong with Colorado. I don't see why we can't raise our own son just because we come into some money. If I want, I can go to court. A father has a right to.
Okay, a father has a right to. So, just in terms of plot and conflict here, she's essentially turning her son over to this guy, and the father is protesting, at least initially. He doesn't want this to happen. But pay really close attention to the blocking of the characters in this frame, where the characters are positioned in relation to one another, and in relation to the camera itself. Okay, so Charlie Kane is still in the background. He's still framed in this, and he's framed not only by the larger frame of the camera, but also by the window. Okay, this is a classic frame within a frame effect, and I'll talk about more about that in just a sec. So he's the smallest character in this scene. Now, Alfred Hitchcock once famously said that the size of an object in the frame is equal to its importance or its power. I'm kind of paraphrasing him there. So the smaller an object in the frame, the less significant, the less important, and the less powerful it is. And of course, of all of these characters who are framed in this shot, Charlie has the least amount of power. He literally has no power. He is being handed over, almost purchased by this guy right here. And he has no idea what's going on. He's just playing happily and innocently in the background. Okay, the person who has the most power in this scene is actually his mother. Okay, and she's actually the largest object in the foreground, or the largest character in the foreground. She and I really wish I remembered his name. I'm sorry, but this guy here that they have the most power in this scene because they are the ones involved in this transaction. Okay. Now, in kind of the middle ground here is Charlie's father, and he is trying to fight against this. He's arguing against this handing over of Charlie. But look where he is. He's actually smaller. If you compare the size of his head to the size of their heads, he's smaller. Even though he's raising objections to this, she is ignoring him. She's practically not even listening to him. She's going right ahead with this, okay, because she has all of the power in this scene, and they're not even looking at him. Okay, they're looking at this document. He's looking at her. and uh, and so his protest is really feeble at best. This shot, by the way, and this frame is as good as any to talk about this. This shot is a classic example of what's called deep space composition. Okay, where you have objects or characters in the foreground, you have a character in the middle ground, and you have a character in the background. And the placement of these characters between the different planes on the field here, they communicate something here. Okay, and that is that Charlie, who's all the way in the background, very, very tiny, has no idea and is powerless to do anything about what's happening. Charlie's fate is essentially being decided for him. Okay? And it's being decided by the characters in the foreground. Okay? But Charlie's innocent playing here creates a moment of almost sadness, and kind of a moment of irony, right? That he's totally innocent, has no idea about what's about to change his life. This major thing that's about to completely upend his life and send it in a different direction. Yeah.
Bill, and leaves worthless stock behind. That property is just as much my property as anybody's, now that it's valuable. And if Fred Graves had any idea all this was going to happen, he'd have made out those certificates in both our names.
However, they were made out in Mrs. Kane's name.
He owed the money for the board to the both of us.
The bank's decision on all matters
I don't hold with signing my boy away to any banker's guardian.
I want you to
just
stop
because...
all this nonsense,
The bank's
Jim.
decision on all matters concerning his education, his places of residence, and similar subjects is to be
The
final.
idea of a bank being the guardian.
I want you to stop all this nonsense, Jim.
We will assume full management of the Colorado loan,
Yeah,
of which I
they're all
Mr.
arguing
Kane,
over
you
Charlie.
are the sole owner.
Where do I sign
Charlie is in the
statute?
middle of all of this. Literally,
Harry,
he's in the middle
I'm
between
asking you
them.
for the last time. Anybody
But
think
look how
I
small
haven't
he
been a
is.
good
The sum of
husband, a father?
$50,000 a year is to be paid to you and Mr. Kane as long as you both live, and thereafter to the survivor.
Well, let's hope it's all for the best.
It is.
As soon as he heard the price, the money that they were going to get, he's suddenly okay with it, or at least willing to allow it to happen. Okay, watch this.
Everything else, the principal as well as all monies earned, is to...
Oops. Oh, no. Okay. Let's go back one again. Go through this.
Go on.
Sorry,
Mr.
guys.
Let's hope it's all for the best.
It is.
Okay. So they're standing up. They're about to change their position in the frame. Okay, so this again is an element of blocking, the importance of the positions of the characters. So the mother begins to go towards the background. Okay, now this is important because now she's getting smaller, and you would think that as she gets smaller, her importance is going to change, or her power is going to change, but it's not, because then watch what the camera does. Oh, this is really frustrating.
It's his 25th birthday, at which time...
Okay, the camera changes position. So we cut to a new shot. Okay? And then once again, she is the largest character in the frame because she is in the foreground. She is kind of dominating, visually dominating this shot. And the two men behind her are much smaller. Okay, so again, she holds all the power. And of course, this is conveyed too through her stern, almost cold, detached expression here.
He is to come into complete possession.
Charles! Go on, Mr. Thatcher.
Well, it's almost 5, Mrs. Kane. Don't you think I'd better meet the boy?
Mr. Thatcher.
I've got his trunk
Change
all
his name
packed. I've had it packed for a week.
That's just an icy cold line right there. I've had his trunk all packed for a week. She's been,
I've
this is
arranged for a trip to
premeditated.
Chicago. I reported him with me.
Okay, now the camera pans and pulls away.
Better come inside, son.
Well, that's quite a
And
snowman.
then watch what
You got it all by
happens
yourself,
to the
my lad.
blocking. And again, look at the positions of the character in the frame.
This is Mr. Thatcher, Charles. Oh.
How do you do, Charles?
He comes from the east.
Wow.
Hello, Charlie.
Charles? Yes, Mom.
Okay, this is a classic element of blocking in Citizen Kane, and you'll see a couple of other examples of this in just a little bit. But we have kind of almost like a triangle of characters here. We've got the father in the background, and of course he's lower. Okay, if we think about like the the vertical dimensions here of this frame, he's lower than the other two adults in this shot. So you have the mother here on the right. She is dominating the right half. You have Mr. Thatcher here on the left. Okay, he's kind of taking up the left third of the frame, and you have the father in the background. And look at Charlie. Charlie is almost literally trapped. Okay, in terms of where he is in the frame, he is trapped. The mother's on the right, Mr. Thatcher's on the left, and he's trapped in the middle. In terms of the foreground and background, he is trapped between his mother, Mr. Thatcher, here in the foreground, and his father in the background. Okay, think about that idea visually and metaphorically in terms of trapping Charlie in between all of these characters. I mentioned before that what this scene is about is Charlie's fate being decided for him. Okay? He is not in control of his fate, and this is a great visual representation too of that. Okay, these three characters are all controlling his fate for him, and visually we see how they're kind of locking him in and trapping him within the frame. Okay, let's move along to the next one.
Mr. Thatcher's going to take you on a trip with him tonight.
Just see this again
You'll
here.
be leaving on number 10.
That's the train with all the lights on it.
You going, Mom?
Well, no, your mother won't be going right away, Charles, but she'll...
Okay. All right. Let's take a look at this scene here real quick. We won't let this one play out too long. This is much later in Charlie's life. This is Charlie, an older Charlie here in the background, and this is, of course, when he loses a good chunk of his business, of his media empire, just after the stock market crash.
Don't you think it's rather unwise costing you $1 million this year? 60.
Sorry, I gotta fast forward here. 1929, so we know that this is right when the stock market crash hits.
Respect to the said newspapers, the said Charles Foster Kane hereby relinquishes all control thereof, and of the syndicates pertaining thereto, and any and all other newspaper
There's
press
Mr.
and
Thatcher.
publishing properties of any kind whatsoever, and agrees to abandon all claim
Which
thereto.
means we're bust. All right.
Well, out of cash.
All right, Mr. Bernstein. I've read it, Mr. Thatcher.
Okay. So here again, we see almost a similar effect as we saw in the last shot with the window. Okay, we have a window in the background. We have Charlie near the window, walking towards the window. But we get this great use of deep space composition. We have Mr. Bernstein here on the right, occupying the right third of our frame. We have Mr. Thatcher, who is kind of occupying the left third, kind of like he was before. And so the visual weight here is kind of balanced between these two characters in the foreground. And then it's also balanced in the background with Charlie. Who's directly in the center. Now you would think being directly in the center would give him power, but again, this is about size as much as it is about position within the frame. He is much smaller than these two characters. So again, Charlie's fate here is not, again, it's not being determined by him. He's not in control of his fate. He's losing a good chunk of his empire here because of the stock market crash. He's powerless to do anything about this.
Let me sign it. I'll go home.
Too old to call me Mr. Thatcher, Charles.
This is a neat effect.
Old to call anything else.
You don't really notice it until he walks all the way back, just how high those windows are. But that makes him seem even smaller and even more powerless.
Pay to Charles Foster Kane as long as
My
he lives.
allowance.
The sum continue to maintain over your newspapers a large measure of control.
Ah, okay. So see what happens there. They're talking now, not just about what he's losing, but actually they're talking about what he is able to still control, how much control he's still going to have over what's left of this media empire. And as soon as they start talking about that control, he gets much bigger within the frame. Not dominating it, at least as much as these two characters, but certainly not as dwarfed and diminished as he was when he was standing under that window. He looked very puny just a moment ago. So this is a great example of how Orson Welles and Greg Toland, the cinematographer of Citizen Kane, are using are using visual storytelling, are using shot composition, specifically deep space composition, the rule of thirds, and balance, to show us, to kind of tell the story of Kane's loss of power, his holding on to a certain amount of power, but also, again, about the kind of sad truth of Charles Foster Kane, which is that he doesn't have as much control over things as he might want to believe he does. Okay, let's go to the next scene here. This is another cool scene in terms of blocking. This is, of course, when Charlie Kane's first wife, Emily, here on the right, when she finds out that he's having an affair. She's given a note and told to go to an address. The address is, of course, the address of Kane's mistress, Susan, over here on the left. She's a singer and actress. And they show up at her apartment, and watch what happens. I'll kind of walk you through this. So this scene opens with Emily here on the right, balanced by Kane on the left. And this is a great use of balance in terms of where they are in the frame, in terms of the rule of thirds, but also in terms of color. She's very brightly lit, and he's kind of standing here in the shadows. And that's meaningful too, of course. She's seeking the truth, and he's been lying to her. He's been cheating on her, and wants to hide the truth.
Mr. Kane.
Okay, so they enter the building. I love the way that Greg Toland decided to position the camera here, because it enables him to do a lot. So we get this great low angle.
I didn't want it.
Oops, did it again. Okay.
Come right in. Charlie forced me to send your wife the letter. I didn't want it. He's been saying the most terrible.
Okay, let's try this one more time. Okay. All right, so I'll just talk about this real quick. So as they begin to climb the stairs, Susan here is framed by the doorway, another frame within a frame. This helps to call attention to her because of the lighting behind her. But it also kind of helps to frames within a frame can sometimes bound a character in or block a character in even more, make them feel even more, how do you want to say, confined, okay, because they're confined within the space of the camera frame, but also this internal frame as well. Let's hope this works. Okay, here we go.
Charlie forced me to send your wife the letter. I didn't want it. He's been saying the most terrible.
All right, so one of the things that's so interesting about this shot is the use of lines. Okay. We get a lot of vertical lines. We have the vertical lines here on the banister, the vertical lines here too in the wallpaper. Go back to that just a sec so you can see. We get the vertical lines on the door frame as well. But we also have these cool horizontal lines here, of course, at the top of the railing, the horizontal lines here on the crown molding, on the ceiling. And I guess my interpretation of this is they help give a sense almost of imprisonment, of being trapped. Okay? He is trapped both vertically by these lines, which kind of close him off, and then horizontally, almost like prison bars. Okay, but also look at the other way that he's trapped. He's trapped between his wife on the right and Geddes, his political rival here on the left, who is essentially blackmailing Charlie. He wants Charlie to drop out of the race so that he can win, and he's using this affair, the threat of publicizing this affair, to get what he wants. Okay? Again, Kane is in the middle of other people. Okay, Let's watch how this unfolds.
I'm Jim Geddes.
Yes.
This is a great use of shadow, too.
I made Miss Alexander send you the note, Mrs. Kane. She didn't want to at first, but she did it.
Charlie, the things he said to me, he threatened me.
Geddes.
Okay, now,
I don't think I will postpone doing something about you until I'm elected. To start with, I think I'll break your neck.
okay, so we're going to talk about lighting next week, but just kind of a preview here. This is a great use both of visual balance, but also lighting. Kane and Geddes here are in the foreground, and so at this moment, this seems like kind of an equal struggle between these two powerful figures. And Kane here, who's taller and kind of looking down at Geddes, for a moment seems to have a little bit more power over him. Okay, but both of them are very, very dark. They're in the foreground. They have these dark suits on. Their faces are shadowed much more than Emily's is here, and that, of course, is helping emphasize the kind of darkness of the situation that they're in. They're talking about, you know, a major political scandal. Emily here in the center of the frame is much lower. She's not really playing much of a role yet in this dynamic, but that will change very quickly.
Maybe you can do it, maybe you can't, Mr. Kane.
Charles, you're breaking this man's neck would scarcely explain this note. Serious consequences for Mr. Kane, for yourself, and for your son.
He just wanted to get her to
What
come
does
here,
this
and
note mean, Miss?
I'm Susan Alexander. I know what you think, Mrs.
What
Kane.
does this note mean, Miss
She
Alexander?
don't know, Mrs. Kane. She just sent it because I made her see it wouldn't be smart for her not to send
In
it.
case you don't know, Emily, this gentleman...
I'm not a gentleman. Your husband's only trying to be funny, calling me one. I don't even know what a gentleman is.
The rest of this scene almost
See,
plays out
my
as a
idea of a
conversation
gentleman-
between Geddes and Emily. They're talking, of course,
Mrs.
about
Kane,
a
if I owned
situation
newspaper and I didn't like the way somebody was doing things,
that
some politicians say, I'd fight him with everything
will
I
have
had.
the most
Only I wouldn't
significant
show him
impact
a
on
contest
Charlie.
with stripes so his children could see the picture in the paper.
But they're not talking to him. They're talking about him. They're talking in front of him. Okay. Once again, the characters who seem to matter the most in this scene, who have the most power, are in the foreground. Charlie, who just a moment ago seemed to have a lot of power, even over Geddes, is now diminished in the background. Okay. They're talking about him. And not to him. He's not really involved in this. So it's, again, in this scene, it's as if his fate is being decided for him.
Or his mother.
A cheap, crooked grafter.
We're talking now about what you are.
He can't even get a word in edgewise.
Mrs. Kane, I'm fighting for my life. Not just my political life, my life.
Charlie said unless you would
That's what I said. Here's
Now
the
watch
chance I'm
what
willing to
happens
give him
with
more of a
Susan.
chance than he'd give me.
Susan
Mr.
is
Kane makes up his mind by tomorrow that
in the
he'll
middle
think
of
he has
these
to
three
go away
characters,
for a year
almost
or
the way
two.
that young Charlie
Monday morning,
was
every paper
in the
in the
middle of
state
his
except
parents
he'll carry the
and
story
Mr.
out.
Thatcher in that earlier scene.
What story?
And they don't even let her speak.
Story about
She
him and
starts
Miss
to, but they cut her
Alexander,
off.
Mr. Kane.
Watch.
There isn't any story.
Shut up!
Mr.
We
Kane.
got evidence that'll look bad in the headlines.
She has
You
no
want me to
voice.
give you the evidence, Mr. Kane?
She has no power in this situation. She's almost as trapped as Charlie is. Okay? And that comes across both in terms of the script, but also visually. Right? This is what we mean by visual storytelling. The composition of that shot helps to show just how powerless she and Charlie are in the events that are about to affect them tremendously. Okay. Okay. I want to talk now about some key shots just by looking at some individual frames here. Of course, I went over this one in detail, but I just want to reiterate so you can see the connections to the next frames. Okay, so again, this is an example of deep space composition. We have our characters in the foreground who, because they are in the foreground, they have a lot of visual weight. I'd say probably most of the visual weight falls on them. The remaining visual weight is kind of divided among Charlie and his father here. Okay, but they have the most power in this scene. And then Charlie, of course, has the least amount of power. He has no power in this scene, and so he is kind of boxed in, as it were, both literally and figuratively. Okay, his fate is being decided for him, hence the frame within a frame, and hence his size in relation to the other characters. Here's a great use of the high angle. And again, we know that the high angle is often used to show a character's lack of power. Maybe it's a character who feels vulnerable or threatened. And again, Mr. Thatcher here on the left. And then we have all of Mr. Thatcher's, I guess you could call them his servants, his housekeepers, and so forth, butlers, the people that work for him. They are trapping Charlie within this frame. Okay, he has nowhere to go. He can't get out this way. He can't get out this way. So within the frame, he's completely blocked in. This is a great example of blocking. Okay, and the importance of blocking in terms of cinematography and where characters are in the frame. Little Charlie here again is caught in the middle of things and has no control. Go to the next one. Okay, we talked about this one already. You can see kind of the similarities here. If we want to look back here, Charlie in the background, kind of framed by a window. And again, this scene is about a loss of control, loss of power. Here's another one. This is a reflection of a kind of a younger Charlie Kane. I think he's in his 20s here, and he's celebrating his purchase of a newspaper. This is kind of the beginning of his empire building here, and he's reflected in the window. And as he is kind of happily celebrating here, these two characters here are talking about whether or not they think Charlie's going to kind of stay true to himself, or whether he thinks this power is going to go to his head, and so forth. And this symbol here of Jed kind of blowing smoke into Charlie's reflection is also kind of foreshadowing the doubts he's going to have about his friend Charlie, and the criticisms he's ultimately going to make of Charlie in the future. But again, two characters talking about Charlie, and Charlie has no idea. He's just kind of happily playing in the background as he did when he was a boy. Okay. Here's a great high-angle shot where we get Charlie framed within the frame here of the window. Geddes is, of course, looking down on him. Charlie is very small, right? In fact, the image of Charlie here on his campaign poster is much, much bigger. And, of course, this goes along with the way that Charlie Foster Kane is characterized throughout the film. He's larger than life. The image that he projects of himself is much greater and more powerful than who he really is, right? In the end, he's just this lost little boy who's longing for his sled, and the childhood that was kind of stolen from him, right? But even here, he is not as powerful as this image of him might project, because Geddes here has the upper hand. He knows about the affair, and he's going to use it to leverage his power against Charlie. We talked about this one here already. Here's another great one. Another example of deep space composition that gives us a lot of information. Okay. This, of course, is much, much later in his marriage to Susan. Susan just feels stuck and trapped by Charlie, and decides to try to kill herself by overdosing on painkillers. And that's what's in the foreground here. Okay, so this scene is telling us that she has tried to kill herself with this lethal overdose. So in the foreground is the means of her suicide. She is in the middle ground here, and then Charlie here. Look at this. Charlie's in the background, framed here by a door. Okay, he is powerless to try to stop her. He tries to control her, but ultimately, in a kind of feeble, very tragic way, she tries to gain control over Charlie by taking her own life, and that's evident here by Charlie diminished in the background here, and the size of the drugs here in the foreground. And then the last one I wanted to show you, I think it's the last one. Yeah, the last one I want to show you here is just after Susan leaves him. And he walks to her bedroom across this long hallway. And look at this, is such an awesome shot. He's in a frame within a frame within a frame within a frame, as it were. Okay, so he's framed all the way in the background by this doorway, and he is so tiny, right? He's just been abandoned. He's just been left behind. and he's got nobody anymore. Okay, and he couldn't stop her. He couldn't control her. So his attempts to control his fate, his life, and other people around him are futile. He has no control. Ultimately, he has no power, and that's why he's so tiny and framed here. But he's also framed by this archway, and then again this other archway, and then this archway, and then this doorway here. And so all of these frames, I think, are incredibly symbolic. He has just his whole life been kind of boxed in, and thought he was very powerful, but again, was not. And he's also essentially trapped by his own money. All of these ornate doorways are part of his huge mansion, and he has become kind of a shut-in, as it were, within his wealth. So his wealth has in a way cut him off from other people and from his own humanity. And I think that's also suggested by these multiple frames within a frame. So that's it for composition in Citizen Kane. I could do this for hours. But if you have any thoughts on Kane, if you watched Kane and you saw some other things that I didn't talk about, feel free to send me an email or call me up on Google Chat in the afternoons and we can talk about it. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. I hope that was useful. And on to the next thing.